The jungle of New Guinea is a possessive, living entity, a place where the dense canopy and relentless growth erase history with terrifying speed. During the darkest days of the Pacific War, this landscape did not merely claim the lives of Australian soldiers, it absorbed entire units into its silent, green depths, leaving behind a mystery that has haunted the nation for generations. This is not the story of a single lost battalion, but of a recurring, chilling phenomenon, the complete disappearance of infantry platoons. In the brutal campaign along the Kokoda Track and the subsequent battles for the North Coast, multiple small groups of 30 to 40 men vanished from the face of the earth. One such platoon, from the 39th Battalion, was last seen in late August 1942, advancing into a mist-shrouded gorge near Guinea. They were young militiamen, their uniforms still khaki, their faces pale from a life in Melbourne suburbs. They moved up the track and into the fog. Within hours, they had ceased to exist as a coherent military force. Within days, they were listed as missing, a bureaucratic term that masked a terrifying reality. How could dozens of armed, trained men simply dissolve without a trace, not once, but repeatedly? Their story is the ultimate expression of the war in the Pacific, a conflict fought against a ruthless enemy in an environment that was equally merciless. By the middle of 1942, the Japanese war machine appeared unstoppable. The fall of Singapore and the bombing of Darwin shattered any illusion of Australian security, making a direct invasion a tangible threat. The Imperial Japanese Army's South Seas Detachment, under the command of Major General Tomataro Hirai, landed on the north coast of New Guinea at Buna and Gona in July. Their objective was clear and devastatingly simple: cross the Owen Stanley Range via the Kokoda Track and capture Port Moresby. This would give Japan a strategic air and naval base to sever Australia from its American allies. The only force standing in their path was a collection of ill-prepared Australian militia battalions. The 39th Battalion, along with others, was rushed forward. These were the Chacos, or chocolate soldiers, young men conscripted for home defense, many of whom had never fired a shot in anger. They were sent into a primordial wilderness armed with heavy World War I-era rifles, inadequate supplies, and wearing khaki uniforms that stood out like beacons in the green jungle. The Owen Stanley Range was a formidable natural fortress, a place of razor-backed ridges, deep, shadowed valleys, and constant, chilling rain. The campaign was one of strategic delay. The Australian command, under General Thomas Blamey, understood that the raw militia could not hold the veteran Japanese forces. Their mission was to trade space for time, fighting a series of desperate rearguard actions to slow the Japanese advance until the battle-hardened veterans of the Australian Imperial Force, the 7th Division, could be brought forward from North Africa. The stage was set for a tragedy where small units would be sacrificed for the survival of the whole. The combat along the Kokoda Track was a platoon commander's war, a brutal, intimate struggle where 30 men could hold a ridge for a day or be wiped out in an hour. The environment was an unrelenting adversary. The track itself was a narrow, muddy footpath, often a river of slick, clinging clay. Men marched single file, their boots rotting on their feet, their bodies stooped under the weight of their packs and weapons. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of damp earth and decay. Malaria, dysentery, and tropical ulcers were rampant, draining a man's strength far more effectively than enemy fire. A platoon, operating as the vanguard for its company, could easily find itself several hours ahead of the main body, its only link to command a fragile thread of Papuan native orderers, the revered Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels who ran messages through the Japanese lines. It was in this context of extreme isolation and physical degradation that the first disappearances began. A platoon from the 53rd Battalion, on a patrol to locate the Japanese flank near Uvi in early August, simply failed to return to its designated rally point. The initial assumption at battalion headquarters, itself reeling from constant attack in the chaos of retreat, was that the unit was delayed or had taken a different, unmapped route. The wireless sets were notoriously unreliable, their signals blocked by the towering mountains and dense jungle. As 24 hours passed with no sign, and then 48, the concern turned to a cold, sinking realization. A patrol from another company would be sent to investigate, finding only an empty stretch of jungle, perhaps a few discarded empty ration tins, but no sign of a fight, no bodies, no clue. The jungle had closed around the lost men, leaving no trace. The final, definitive moments of these lost platoons can be reconstructed from the fragmented and often heartbreaking entries in unit war diaries and the accounts of the last men to see them alive. Consider the precise case of a platoon from the 214th Battalion during the pivotal Battle of Isarava. In the last week of August 1942, the battalion was fighting for its life, conducting a ferocious fighting withdrawal under overwhelming Japanese pressure. On the morning of August 29th, one particular platoon was ordered to hold a critical flanking position on a spur overlooking the main track. Later that afternoon, another company from the 216th Battalion, falling back through their position, exchanged hurried words with the platoon sergeant. The men were exhausted, their eyes hollow, but they were resolute. They had dug weapon pits and were preparing for a fight. That was the last confirmed sighting. There was no dramatic last radio transmission, the sets had long since failed. The turning point came with a classic Japanese tactical maneuver. While the main Australian force was engaged frontally, strong Japanese elements infiltrated through the dense jungle on the flanks, a move considered impossible by the Australian command. By dusk, the platoon was completely cut off. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Key, knew the unit was missing, but his own headquarters was under direct threat of encirclement. The agonizing decision was made: the battalion had to withdraw immediately or be annihilated. There was no capacity for a rescue mission. The lost platoon was left to its fate. What followed was likely a short, violent firefight in the near-total darkness of the jungle night. Some men may have been killed in their weapon pits. Others, perhaps a small group of survivors, may have attempted a desperate breakout, discarding their heavy equipment and plunging blindly down the steep mountainside, away from the sounds of battle, becoming hopelessly lost in the trackless ravines. The enduring mystery of these disappearances is not for lack of investigation, but is a direct result of the unique and terrible circumstances of the campaign. The chaos of the Australian withdrawal, combined with the high casualties and fluid command structure of the advancing Japanese forces, created a historical black hole. Credible theories, developed by historians like Peter Brune and Paul Ham through meticulous study of war diaries and Japanese archives, offer plausible explanations. The first theory is tactical annihilation. A platoon could be targeted by a much larger Japanese force in a sudden, overwhelming assault. The fighting would be close quarters and brutal, using bayonets and grenades. The Japanese, pressed for time and operating deep in enemy territory, would have quickly stripped the bodies of weapons, ammunition, and any useful intelligence before melting back into the jungle. Such a small-scale action might never have been deemed significant enough to report up the chain of command, or the record was lost when the Japanese unit itself was later decimated. A second, equally plausible theory is death by disorientation and disease. A platoon, after being cut off, might have successfully disengaged but then become utterly lost. Without maps or compass skills suited to the featureless jungle, they would wander in a desperate circle. Weakened by weeks of poor rations and racked by malaria and dysentery, the men would have succumbed one by one. Their bodies would collapse on the jungle floor, to be rapidly consumed by insects, scavengers, and the incredibly fast-growing moss and fungi. Within days, no visible trace would remain. A third factor is the sinking battlefield. The New Guinea jungle is a place of constant seismic activity, heavy rainfall, and landslides. A position held one day could be buried under tons of mud and debris the next, creating unintentional, anonymous graves for the fallen. The legacy of the lost platoons is a profound and lasting scar on the Australian national consciousness. These were not faceless statistics, they were individuals like Private John Metcalf of the 39th, a laborer from Brunswick, or Lieutenant John McLean of the 214th, a law student from Melbourne. Their families endured a special kind of torment, receiving the official telegram that read missing, believed killed. This status offered no body to bury, no grave to visit, no certainty upon which to anchor their grief. It was a perpetual state of anxious mourning. The story of these swallowed men has come to symbolize the very essence of the Kokoda campaign, a sacrifice made by young, unprepared citizens for the direct defense of their homeland, under conditions of almost unimaginable hardship. In this narrative, the role of the Papuan people is sacred. The Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels were often the last to see these men alive, and their incredible loyalty and bravery in caring for the wounded and carrying messages represented the last, fragile thread of hope. Today, the silence of the Owen Stanley Range stands as their memorial. There are no grand monuments where they fell, for no one knows the exact location. They are remembered in the quiet determination of the trekkers who walked the Kokoda Track, in the history books that strive to tell their story, and in the hearts of a nation that understands that some men gave not only their lives, but their very physical presence to the land they died to protect. They remain, forever, a part of the mountain.